The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside High School in Cedar Falls, Virginia. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell pulled her modest Honda into a visitor's spot, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. After 15 years in the Navy, including 3 combat deployments and a commendation for valor, she thought she'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her daughter Emma sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. The 13-year-old's face was pale, her eyes ringed with dark circles from sleepless nights. Sarah reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You ready, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly. Emma nodded but didn't speak. She hadn't spoken much in the 3 days since it started. As they walked toward the principal's office, Sarah noticed the whispers. Groups of teenagers clustered near lockers fell silent as they passed, then erupted in hushed conversations the moment they were out of earshot. Sarah's jaw tightened. She recognized the atmosphere. It was the same tension that filled a room before an ambush. Principal Margaret Hendricks greeted them with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was a thin woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mrs. Mitchell, Emma, please come in," she said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. "It's Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," Sarah corrected quietly, "or just Sarah is fine." The principal's smile flickered. "Of course, I understand you wanted to discuss the incident involving Emma and some of her classmates." "Incident?" Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Principal Hendricks, my daughter has been receiving threatening messages for 3 days. Someone spray-painted the word snitch on her locker. Yesterday, she found a dead bird in her backpack with a note that said, 'Keep your mouth shut.'" Principal Hendricks folded her hands on her desk. "I assure you, we take bullying very seriously here at Riverside. However, we need to be careful about making accusations without proof. The students Emma has named come from very prominent families in Cedar Falls. The Blackwell family, for instance, has been a cornerstone of this community for generations." Sarah felt her blood pressure rising. "Are you saying my daughter is lying?" "I'm saying teenagers can sometimes exaggerate situations or misinterpret." "She has the messages," Sarah interrupted, pulling out her phone. "She has photos of the locker. She has the note that was left with the dead bird. What more proof do you need?" The principal's expression hardened. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're upset, but I've known the Blackwell boy since he was in kindergarten. He's a star athlete, an honor student, and his father sits on the school board. I find it very difficult to believe he would engage in this kind of behavior." Sarah leaned forward. "What exactly did my daughter witness that's caused all this?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I saw them, Mom. I saw Connor Blackwell and his friends stealing from the lockers during gym class. They were taking money, phones, even some jewelry. When Connor saw me, he told me if I said anything, I'd regret it." "And you reported this to the school?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "I told Coach Henderson," Emma said. "He said he'd look into it, but the next day the messages started." Principal Hendricks sighed. "Coach Henderson mentioned a student had made some concerning allegations. However, when we checked the security cameras, there was no footage of the incident Emma described." "That's because the cameras in that hallway have been broken for 2 months," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. "Everyone knows that." "Be that as it may," the principal continued, "without concrete evidence and given the seriousness of accusing these young men, we have to be very careful. I suggest Emma simply avoid these students and the situation will resolve itself." Sarah stood up slowly. She'd faced down enemy combatants with more courage than this woman was showing now. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. My daughter witnessed a crime, reported it through proper channels, and is now being threatened and harassed. Your solution is for her to avoid her harassers and hope they leave her alone." "Mrs. Mitchell, please don't take that tone with me." "Lieutenant Commander," Sarah said firmly, and I'll take whatever tone is necessary to protect my child. If this school won't handle this situation, I'll find someone who will." As they left the office, Sarah noticed a group of boys watching from down the hallway. The tallest one, a broad-shouldered kid with perfectly styled blonde hair, smirked and made a gun gesture with his fingers, pointing it at Emma. Emma grabbed her mother's arm and hurried toward the exit. In the car, Emma finally broke down. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just kept quiet." Sarah pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. "Don't you ever apologize for doing the right thing. Do you hear me? Never. But they're going to keep coming after me. Connor's dad is rich and important and we're nobody." "We are not nobody," Sarah said firmly. "You are the daughter of a naval officer and the granddaughter of a Marine. We don't back down from bullies, no matter how much money they have or who their parents are." But even as she said the words, Sarah felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She was a single mother. Her ex-husband had left when Emma was 4, unable to handle the deployments and the long separations. She'd built a good life for them, but it was modest. She didn't have the connections or the resources that families like the Blackwells had. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She was composing an email to the school superintendent when her phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Hello. Is this Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice, nervous and hushed. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Rebecca Torres. My son Daniel is in Emma's class. I heard what happened in the principal's office today. One of the secretaries is my cousin." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Go on." "My son was also threatened by Connor Blackwell and his friends. About 2 months ago, he saw them vandalizing Mr. Peterson's classroom. They threatened him, and when I tried to report it, I got the same runaround you got. Principal Hendricks made it very clear that pursuing the matter would be unwise." "Did your son stop reporting things after that?" There was a long pause. "Yes, he learned to keep his head down and his mouth shut. I'm ashamed to say I encouraged him to do that. I'm a single parent too, and I was afraid of what they might do if we pushed back." Sarah felt a mix of anger and understanding. "Why are you calling me?" "Because I saw you today. I saw the way you stood up to Hendricks, and I heard that your Navy, that you served overseas. My brother was in the Marines. He always said that service members don't abandon their own." Rebecca's voice cracked. "I was hopping. Maybe you'd be different. Maybe you wouldn't give up." "I'm not giving up," Sarah said quietly. "But I need help. I need to know everything you know about what's been going on at that school. Meet me tomorrow morning at the coffee shop on Main Street, 7 a.m. before work. I'll tell you everything." After hanging up, Sarah returned to her laptop. But instead of emailing the superintendent, she opened a different browser window. She typed in a name she hadn't thought about in years: Jack Reaper Morrison. Jack had been her mentor when she was a young officer attached to a SEAL team for a joint operation in Afghanistan. He'd retired from the Navy 3 years ago and moved back to his hometown. Sarah scrolled through the search results until she found what she was looking for. Jack Morrison, owner of Morrison Security Consulting, located in Richmond, Virginia, just 40 minutes away. She stared at his business website for a long moment. Jack had taught her that some battles couldn't be won by following the rules. Sometimes you needed someone who knew how to operate in the gray areas, someone who understood that justice and the law weren't always the same thing. Her finger hovered over the phone number listed on the website. Upstairs, she could hear Emma moving around in her room. Her brave, honest daughter, who had done nothing wrong except refuse to look the other way when she saw something unjust. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar gravelly voice answered. "Morrison Security." "Jack, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need your help." There was a brief pause, then a low chuckle. "Mitchell? Well, I'll be damned. What kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into?" "Not me." Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. My daughter, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt her, not even if they think they own this whole damn town. Tell me everything, Jack said, and Sarah heard the sound of a pen clicking in the background. The old seal was already taking notes. And Sarah, whatever this is, you've got my six. Just like old times, the coffee shop on Main Street was nearly empty at 7. Sarah arrived first, choosing a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits died hard. Rebecca Torres walked in 5 minutes later, glancing around nervously before spotting Sarah and hurrying over. Rebecca was a petite woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She clutched a manila folder to her chest like a shield. "Thank you for meeting me," Sarah said, gesturing to the seat across from her. Rebecca slid into the booth and placed the folder on the table between them. "I almost didn't come. I've been up all night thinking about what could happen if anyone finds out I'm talking to you." "No one will know unless you tell them," Sarah assured her. "What's in the folder?" Rebecca opened it carefully, revealing a stack of printed documents. "Everything I've been collecting for the past 3 months. After they threatened Daniel, I started paying attention. I started documenting." Sarah leaned forward as Rebecca spread out the papers. There were photographs of vandalized lockers, printed screenshots of threatening social media messages, and handwritten notes documenting incidents Rebecca had witnessed or heard about. "Connor Blackwell isn't just a bully," Rebecca said quietly. "He's running a protection racket. Kids pay him to leave them alone. Others pay him to make sure their lockers don't get broken into or their homework doesn't mysteriously disappear. He's got at least 6 other boys working with him. How is he getting away with this?" "His father, Richard Blackwell, owns half the commercial real estate in Cedar Falls. He's on the school board, the town council, and he donates heavily to every local politician's campaign. Principal Hendricks's nephew got a very lucrative job at one of Blackwell's companies last year." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "People in this town don't cross Richard Blackwell, and his son knows it." Sarah studied the documents carefully. "This is good work, Rebecca. Why didn't you take this to the police?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "I did. I went to Chief Anderson 2 months ago. He listened politely, took my folder, and told me he'd look into it. A week later, I got written up at my job for the first time in 8 years. Suddenly, my supervisor was finding problems with my work that had never existed before. The message was clear." "Where do you work?" "Cedar Falls Medical Center, in the billing department." Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "Richard Blackwell is on the hospital's board of directors." Sarah sat back, processing this information. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier. "What made you decide to contact me?" "Because you're not from here. You don't depend on the Blackwells for your livelihood. And because," Rebecca hesitated, "because I saw the look in your eyes yesterday. You're not going to back down, and I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of teaching my son that bullies win if they have enough money and connections." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Rebecca's hand. "You did the right thing. I promise you we're going to fix this." "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, pulling out a final document from the bottom of the folder. "3 years ago, there was another student who stood up to Connor Blackwell, a girl named Ashley Chen. She reported him for stealing her phone. 2 weeks later, her family's restaurant mysteriously failed a health inspection they'd never had problems with before. They lost so much business they had to close. The family moved away 6 months later." Sarah felt cold fury settling in her chest. "Do you know where they moved to?" "North Carolina, I think, but Sarah, the Blackwells destroyed them, completely, and they'll do the same to anyone who threatens their precious son." After Rebecca left, Sarah sat alone with her coffee, staring at the folder. She pulled out her phone and called Jack Morrison. "I need you to run a background check on Richard Blackwell and his son Connor," she said when he answered. "And I need you to find a family named Chen who used to own a restaurant in Cedar Falls." "Already done," Jack replied. After our call last night, I started digging. Sarah, this goes deeper than high school bullying. Richard Blackwell has been using his influence to squash anyone who gets in his family's way for years. There are at least 4 other families who have left town under suspicious circumstances after conflicts with the Blackwells. Can you prove it? Not yet, but I'm working on it. I've got some contacts who specialize in this kind of thing. Give me a few days. Jack paused. In the meantime, how's Emma doing? She's scared. She's staying home from school today. I couldn't send her back there, not yet. Smart, keep her close until we figure this out. Jack's voice softened. Mitchell, I want you to know something. This operation, it's personal now. I don't like bullies, and I really don't like bullies who hide behind money and power. We're going to take these people down. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from Principal Hendricks. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm calling to inform you that Emma has been placed on a 3-day suspension for making false accusations against another student. Sarah's hand clenched around the phone. Excuse me. We take false allegations very seriously at Riverside High. Connor Blackwell's parents have provided evidence that Emma has been harassing their son online, making up stories to damage his reputation. That's absurd. Emma doesn't even have Connor's contact information. Nevertheless, the evidence is quite compelling. The suspension begins immediately. I expect you to sign the necessary paperwork when you pick it up from the office. Sarah forced herself to speak calmly. I'll be there in 30 minutes, and Principal Hendricks, I'll be bringing my attorney. She hung up before the principal could respond. Then she called the one lawyer she knew in Cedar Falls, a woman named Patricia Green who'd helped her with her divorce years ago. Patricia, I need your help. 30 minutes later, Sarah and Patricia walked into Riverside High School together. Patricia was a formidable woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for not backing down from anyone. In the principal's office, they found not just Principal Hendricks, but also Richard Blackwell himself. He was a tall man in an expensive suit, with the same cold blue eyes as his son. Ah, Mrs. Mitchell, he said smoothly, I'm glad you could join us. Perhaps now we can resolve this unfortunate situation. My client's name is Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Patricia said sharply. And before anyone signs anything, I'd like to see this so-called evidence against her daughter. Principal Hendricks slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of Instagram messages that appeared to show Emma sending threatening messages to Connor. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she studied them. These are fake. That's a serious accusation, Richard Blackwell said. My son showed us these messages on his phone. He was quite upset. Patricia examined the screenshots carefully. These don't even show Emma's actual Instagram handle. Look here. The username is Emma Mitchell 2024, but Emma's actual account is Emma M Art because she posts her artwork there. This is obviously fabricated. That's your interpretation, Principal Hendricks said stiffly. No, Patricia said firmly. That's the truth. And if you proceed with this suspension based on falsified evidence, I will file a lawsuit against this school, this district, and you personally, Principal Hendricks. I will also be contacting the local media to discuss how this school is protecting bullies while punishing their victims. Richard Blackwell's jaw tightened. I don't appreciate threats. That wasn't a threat, Patricia replied calmly. That was a promise. Now, unless you have actual evidence, and I mean real, verifiable evidence, against Emma Mitchell, I suggest you withdraw this suspension immediately. There was a long, tense silence. Finally, Principal Hendricks cleared her throat. Perhaps we were hasty. I'll reconsider the suspension pending further investigation. You do that, Patricia said, standing up. And Principal Hendricks, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell will be filing a formal complaint with the school board about how this situation has been handled. I suggest you start documenting your actions very carefully from this point forward. As they left the building, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. "Thank you, Patricia, but this isn't over, is it?" "Not even close," Patricia agreed. "They're going to keep coming at you and Emma in different ways. People like the Blackwells don't give up just because they lost one round." That evening, as Sarah was making dinner, there was a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw a man she didn't recognize, mid-50s, weathered face, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the man asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Tom Brennan. I'm a contractor here in town. I heard about what's happening with your daughter and the Blackwell kid." Sarah's guard went up. "What do you want?" Tom glanced around nervously. "Can I come in? What I have to say isn't for the whole neighborhood to hear." Against her better judgment, Sarah let him in. Emma was upstairs doing homework, and Sarah positioned herself between Tom and the staircase. "Make it quick," she said. Tom pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It was a work order from 3 years ago. "See this? This is a job I did for Richard Blackwell. He hired me to do some renovations on a building he owns on Elm Street. So while I was working, I found something. There was a safe hidden behind a wall panel. It was open, and I saw inside before Richard caught me looking. There were stacks of cash, Sarah, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. And there were documents, contracts, photos, things that looked like they could ruin people." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Did you see what was in those documents?" "Not clearly, but I saw enough to know Richard Blackwell has dirt on half the important people in this town. That's how he controls everything. He's got leverage on the mayor, the police chief, probably half the school board." Tom's hands were shaking slightly. "He saw me looking at that safe, told me if I ever mentioned what I saw, he'd make sure I never worked in this town again. I kept my mouth shut for 3 years because I was scared." "Why are you telling me this now?" Tom met her eyes. "Because I've got a daughter too. She graduated from Riverside 3 years ago, and Connor Blackwell made her life hell. She was too afraid to tell us the truth until after she left for college. When I heard what's happening to your girl, and I heard that you're actually fighting back, I figured it was time someone stood up to that bastard." "Tom, if what you're saying is true, this could be dangerous for you." "I know, but I'm tired of living in a town where one family gets to terrorize everyone else just because they've got money and connections." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "That safe is still there, far as I know. The building is an old office complex he never finished renovating. If you can find a way to get inside and document what's in there." Sarah took the card. "Thank you for this, but Tom, you need to be careful. Don't tell anyone else about this conversation." After Tom left, Sarah immediately called Jack Morrison and filled him in. "A safe full of leverage material," Jack said thoughtfully. "That's how these small-town tyrants operate. They collect secrets and use them to keep everyone in line. If we can access that safe, we'd have everything we need to bring him down," Sarah finished. "But Jack, breaking into a building and cracking a safe isn't exactly legal." "No, it's not," Jack agreed. "Which is why we're not going to do it that way. We're going to be smarter than that. Let me make some calls. I think I know someone who can help." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been whether Emma was keeping up with her algebra homework. Now she was caught up in a battle against one of the most powerful families in Cedar Falls, collecting evidence, talking to lawyers, and planning operations like she was back in the Navy. But every time doubt crept in, she thought about Emma's face when those boys threatened her. She thought about Rebecca Torres and her son Daniel, too afraid to speak up. She thought about Ashley Chen and her family, driven out of town for daring to stand up for themselves. No, Sarah thought, this ends now. Whatever it takes, the Blackwell's reign of terror was going to end. Jack Morrison arrived at Sarah's house the following evening, accompanied by a woman Sarah had never met. She was in her early 30s, athletic build, with sharp, intelligent eyes that took in everything at once. "Sarah, this is Valerie Chen," Jack said. "Ashley Chen's older sister." Sarah's eyes widened. "You found them." Valerie shook Sarah's hand firmly. "Jack tracked me down in North Carolina. When he told me what was happening, I caught the first flight out. What the Blackwells did to my family ruined my parents. My father never recovered from losing his restaurant. He died of a heart attack 2 years ago, and I know that stress from what happened here was a major factor." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. "Don't be sorry," Valerie replied, her voice hard. "Help me make them pay for it." They sat around Sarah's kitchen table, Emma having been sent to her room with headphones and strict instructions not to come out. Jack spread out a map of Cedar Falls on the table. "Here's what I've learned," he said, pointing to a building marked on the map. "This is the office complex Tom Brennan told you about. It's been abandoned for 3 years. Richard Blackwell bought it intending to renovate it into high-end condos, but the project stalled. The building is still in his name, and according to property records, there's no active construction or security monitoring." "But if we break in," Sarah began. "We're not breaking in," Valerie interrupted. "I'm a licensed investigative journalist. For the past 5 years, I've been writing exposés on corruption in small towns. What happened to my family inspired me to help other people fight back against local tyrants like Richard Blackwell." She pulled out her phone and showed them a website. "I have legal credentials to investigate matters of public interest. If I enter that building as part of a legitimate investigation into allegations of corruption, that's not breaking and entering. It's investigative journalism. And if you happen to find evidence of criminal activity while conducting your investigation," Jack added with a slight smile, "you're obligated to report it to the authorities." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "But we still need to access the safe. Do you know how to crack safes?" Valerie grinned. "I don't, but my boyfriend does. He's a former FBI forensics specialist who now works in private security. He's been consulting on my investigations for 2 years, and before you ask, yes, he's already on his way here." Over the next 2 days, they planned meticulously. Valerie's boyfriend, Marcus Hayes, arrived with specialized equipment. He was a quiet man with steady hands and an encyclopedic knowledge of security systems. "The safe Tom described sounds like a Liberty presidential model," Marcus explained. "Expensive, secure, but not impossible to open if you know what you're doing. The question is whether Blackwell changed the combination or added additional security measures since Tom saw it." Meanwhile, Sarah and Rebecca continued gathering evidence. More parents came forward quietly, sharing stories of how Connor Blackwell and his friends had terrorized their children. A picture emerged of systematic bullying, theft, and intimidation that had been going on for years, all protected by Richard Blackwell's influence. Patricia Green, the attorney, filed formal complaints with the school board and began building a legal case. But everyone knew that legal channels alone wouldn't be enough. The Blackwells had too many people in their pocket. On Thursday evening, everything came to a head. Emma came home from school. She'd insisted on going back despite Sarah's concerns, with a black eye and a split lip. Sarah's vision went red when she saw her daughter's face. "Who did this?" "Connor and 2 of his friends cornered me in the stairwell," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "They said this was just a warning. They said if I don't transfer to a different school by next week, it's going to get worse." Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, but inside, her mind was already moving. She called Jack immediately. "We move tonight," she said. "I don't care if we're ready or not, this ends tonight." At 11 p.m., Valerie, Marcus, Jack, and Sarah approached the abandoned office complex. They parked 2 blocks away and walked in, Valerie's camera equipment clearly visible, establishing the pretense of a legitimate investigation. The building was dark and silent. Marcus made quick work of the exterior door lock, and they moved inside using flashlights. Tom Brennan had provided detailed direction to the office where he'd seen the safe. They found it exactly where he described, behind a false panel in what had once been Richard Blackwell's private office. The panel was still slightly ajar, as if Blackwell had been accessing it recently. Marcus knelt in front of the safe, his ear pressed against it as his fingers worked the dial. Sarah stood guard at the door while Jack kept watch in the hallway. Valerie documented everything with her camera. 20 minutes passed, 30. Sarah was beginning to worry they'd have to give up when she heard a soft click. "Got it," Marcus whispered. He pulled open the safe door, and they all stared at what was inside. Stacks of cash, as Tom had described, but more importantly, there were folders, dozens of them. Marcus carefully pulled them out and began photographing each page while Valerie recorded video. The contents were damning. There were photographs of the police chief accepting an envelope of cash from Richard Blackwell. There were copies of doctored health inspection reports for competitors' businesses, including the one that had destroyed the Chen family's restaurant. There were records of payoffs to school board members, construction inspectors, and local officials. And in a folder labeled Insurance, there were detailed dossiers on prominent Cedar Falls residents, evidence of affairs, financial improprieties, things that could destroy reputations and careers. This was how Richard Blackwell controlled the town, through a combination of bribery and blackmail. "This is enough to bring down half the town's leadership," Jack said quietly. But Sarah's attention had caught on something else, a smaller folder labeled simply CB. She opened it and found photographs that made her blood run cold. They showed Connor Blackwell and his friends vandalizing school property, stealing from lockers, even assaulting other students. Richard Blackwell had been documenting his son's crimes, possibly as leverage to control Connor himself, or perhaps as insurance against future problems. "He knew," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "Richard Blackwell knew exactly what his son was doing. He had evidence of it all, and he protected him anyway." They photographed everything, then carefully returned the contents to the safe exactly as they'd found them. Marcus closed it and spun the dial, leaving no evidence of their presence. The next morning, Valerie published her exposé online. It included photographs of the documents, video of the safe being opened, and interviews with victims of the Blackwell's intimidation. All people who had finally agreed to speak on record now that there was proof to back up their claims. The story went viral within hours. By noon, news vans from Richmond and Washington, D.C. were setting up outside Richard Blackwell's estate. By evening, state investigators had arrived in Cedar Falls. Sarah watched it all unfold from her living room, Emma sitting beside her, an ice pack on her bruised face. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" Emma asked. "Justice," Sarah said simply, "real justice." The fallout was swift and merciless. Richard Blackwell was arrested on multiple charges including bribery, extortion, and conspiracy. The police chief resigned. 3 school board members were removed from their positions. Principal Hendricks was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Connor Blackwell and his friends were expelled from Riverside High and charged as juveniles for their attacks on Emma and other students. Without his father's protection, Connor faced real consequences for the first time in his life. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks later. Sarah stood in the Riverside High School auditorium, which was packed with students, parents, teachers, and community members. The interim school board had called a special assembly. Valerie Chen stood at the podium, her exposé having won her a regional journalism award. She had donated the prize money to create a scholarship fund for students who'd been victimized by bullying. "What happened in Cedar Falls happened because good people stayed silent," Valerie told the crowd. "My family was destroyed because we were alone in our fight. But Sarah Mitchell and her daughter Emma refused to be silent. They refused to be alone. And because of their courage, an entire system of corruption has been exposed and dismantled. The crowd erupted in applause. Emma, sitting next to Sarah in the front row, blushed but sat a little straighter in her chair. After the assembly, Rebecca Torres approached them with her son Daniel. The boy looked at Emma shyly. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up, for being braver than I was." "You were brave too," Emma told him. "You just needed someone to go first. We all need that sometimes." Tom Brennan stopped by as well, shaking Sarah's hand. "Thank you for taking the risk. My daughter called me from college when she heard what happened. She cried for an hour, but they were good tears. She said it felt like someone finally believed her about what she went through." As the crowd dispersed, Jack Morrison pulled Sarah aside. "So, what's next for you, Lieutenant Commander?" Sarah looked at her daughter, who was laughing with a group of students who had all been victims of Connor's bullying. They were no longer afraid. They were no longer alone. "I've been thinking about that," Sarah said. "My Navy contract is up in 6 months. I was going to re-enlist, but now—" She paused. "I think Cedar Falls needs someone who understands how to fight corruption, someone who won't back down when powerful people try to intimidate them." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about running for school board?" "Maybe, or maybe something bigger. This town needs a change in leadership, real leadership." Sarah smiled. "Besides, I promised Emma I'd stick around and make sure this kind of thing never happens again." "Well," Jack said, "if you decide to run for anything, you've got my support. And I think you'll find you've got a lot of people in this town who are ready for change." 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell announced her candidacy for Cedar Falls Town Council. Her campaign slogan was simple: "Courage over corruption." Emma stood beside her mother at the announcement, no longer the frightened girl who had whispered "Please, Daddy" to her mother 3 months ago. She had found her own courage, and in doing so, had helped spark a transformation in an entire community. The Blackwell family's empire had crumbled. Connor was attending a reform school in another state. Richard Blackwell was awaiting trial, his assets frozen, his influence gone. The people he had blackmailed were cooperating with investigators, finally free from his control. And in Riverside High School, Emma Mitchell had become something unexpected: a hero. Not because she'd fought back physically, but because she'd refused to let injustice go unchallenged, even when it seemed like the entire system was rigged against her. On election night, Sarah won her council seat by a landslide. As she stood on stage giving her victory speech, she saw Emma in the front row, beaming with pride. "I want to thank my daughter," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the crowded venue. "She reminded me that the most powerful weapon we have against corruption isn't force or money or connections. It's courage. The courage to stand up. The courage to speak truth. The courage to believe that right can triumph over might." She paused, making eye contact with Emma. "And she reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is teach their child that it's worth fighting for what's right, even when the fight seems impossible." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah only had eyes for her daughter, who mouthed 2 words: "Thank you." Later that night, as they drove home together, Emma asked, "Mom, do you think Connor Blackwell will ever change?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart, I hope so. People can change if they want to, but that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility was to stand up for what's right and protect others from being hurt. We did that." "It was scary," Emma admitted. "For a while I wasn't sure we were going to win." "Neither was I," Sarah said honestly. "But I learned a long time ago that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. You taught me that all over again." As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Valerie Chen. "Just got word. 3 more towns have reached out asking for help exposing corruption after seeing what happened in Cedar Falls. You started something big, Sarah." Sarah smiled and showed the message to Emma. Maybe it's not just about Cedar Falls anymore, Emma said thoughtfully. Maybe what we did here can help other people too. Maybe it already has. Sarah replied. They walked into their home together. A mother and daughter who had faced down corruption, stood up to bullies, and proven that courage and conviction could overcome even the most entrenched systems of power. The fight had been hard, the cost had been high, but they had won. More importantly, they had shown an entire community that change was possible, that justice could prevail, and that sometimes all it takes is one person or one family brave enough to say no more.